You removed us from the booking?
The flight can't wait.
No.
2 passengers were removed manually.
By whose device?
That's what this file reveals.
The sole voting trustee has arrived to help continue the investigation.
Billy Watson, 43, looked like an ordinary independent logistics consultant from Franklin, Tennessee. Most people believed his wife, Gianna Watson, had carried their family to success while he quietly lived in her shadow. He drove an aging pickup, packed homemade lunches for his 11-year-old son, Owen, and carried a weathered leather briefcase everywhere. What nobody knew was that the man everyone overlooked held authority over a business empire hidden behind layers of corporate ownership. Then Gianna boarded a flight with her company's COO, leaving Billy and Owen behind at gate B14 as the aircraft door slowly sealed shut. If you're watching from somewhere in the world, leave a comment with your country and your local time. I always enjoy seeing where everyone is joining from. And if you love stories filled with quiet strength, unexpected twists, and justice earned through patience instead of revenge, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss tomorrow's story. 18 months earlier, nobody in Franklin, Tennessee would have guessed that the Watson family was quietly drifting toward a collision that would eventually begin inside an airport terminal. Every weekday started almost exactly the same. At 6:00 a.m., Billy Watson was already awake. The coffee maker hummed before sunrise. Bacon sizzled in a cast-iron skillet while pancakes browned beside it. By the time 11-year-old Owen wandered downstairs, rubbing sleep from his eyes, breakfast was already waiting on the kitchen island. Billy never rushed mornings. He believed a child remembered calm far longer than lectures. "Morning, buddy." "Morning, Dad." Owen dropped his backpack beside the dining table before opening his math homework one last time. Billy sat beside him. "You missed number 7. Owen frowned. "I did." Billy smiled and rotated the worksheet. You solved the equation correctly. You just forgot the unit." Owen laughed. "Feet? Again?" Billy nodded. "Details matter." It was something he said often. Not because he wanted Owen to become perfect, because he believed small mistakes eventually became expensive ones. Gianna usually appeared 20 minutes later. Unlike Billy, her mornings moved fast. She answered emails while drinking coffee. She checked overnight shipment reports on her tablet. Her phone rarely stopped vibrating. She had recently been promoted to Vice President of Operations at Meridian Freight Solutions, one of the fastest-growing regional transportation companies in the Southeast. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase, a larger annual bonus, stock incentives, frequent executive travel, and expectations that never seemed to end. Everyone congratulated her. Neighbors admired her. Friends talked about how impressive her career had become. They often did it while Billy stood only a few feet away. "So, Billy," one neighbor joked during a weekend barbecue, "looks like you've got the easy job now." Billy simply smiled. "I guess someone has to make breakfast." Everyone laughed. The conversation moved on. Nobody noticed that Billy never tried correcting anyone. His pickup truck was nearly 12 years old. Its silver paint had faded under Tennessee summers. The driver's seat showed signs of thousands of miles. Instead of replacing it, Billy simply maintained it carefully. The truck always started. That mattered more to him than appearances. Inside the garage, expensive fishing equipment hung neatly on one wall. Old camping gear occupied another. Nothing suggested wealth. Nothing hinted at influence. Nothing invited attention. Billy preferred it that way. His home office occupied the smallest bedroom in the house. One sturdy oak desk, 2 computer monitors, shelves filled with logistics textbooks, transportation regulations, and supply chain journals. No expensive artwork, no luxury furniture. Clients hired him because he solved operational problems. Most never asked many questions about his background. He never volunteered information. When contracts ended, he quietly moved on to the next assignment. His invoices were modest. His wardrobe even more so. Blue button-down shirts, khaki pants, brown boots polished enough to look respectable but never fashionable. People formed opinions quickly. Independent consultant, works from home, flexible schedule, probably earns enough. Maybe. Gianna's position seemed much more important. She attended conferences in Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, and Denver. Corporate photographs occasionally appeared on Meridian's LinkedIn page. Her smile stood beside executives wearing tailored suits. Employees congratulated her online. Friends shared every announcement. Billy quietly clicked the like button every single time. He never felt threatened by her success. In fact, he had encouraged her to pursue it when the promotion required additional travel. Billy reorganized his consulting schedule without complaint. He drove Owen to baseball practice, attended every parent-teacher conference, cooked dinner, managed grocery shopping, took the family dog to the veterinarian, helped with science projects. To Billy, marriage was never a competition. It was shared responsibility. One Saturday afternoon, Owen's baseball team played at Liberty Park. Parents filled aluminum bleachers beneath bright spring sunshine. Billy stood near first base, offering encouragement after every inning. Gianna arrived during the fourth, still wearing business clothes, still carrying her laptop bag. She smiled, waved at Owen, and answered 2 phone calls before the game ended. Other parents noticed. "She's really moving up," one father whispered. "I heard she might become COO someday." Another replied, "Billy's lucky." Lucky. Billy heard the word often. He never argued with it. After the game, Owen earned the Sportsmanship Medal. Not for scoring, not for hitting home runs, for helping another player after a collision at second base. Billy smiled with quiet pride. Character mattered. Awards faded. That evening, the family ate dinner together. For nearly 30 minutes, everything felt normal. Then Gianna's phone rang again. She glanced at the screen. "I have to take this." She stepped outside. Billy watched through the kitchen window. She paced slowly across the backyard while speaking quietly. He couldn't hear the conversation. He didn't try. When she returned, she smiled naturally. "Another conference." "So soon?" Billy asked. "Atlanta next week." "I thought Nashville was next." "They changed the schedule." Billy nodded. "Okay." That was all. No accusation, no suspicion, only acceptance. But later that night, while Owen slept upstairs, Billy reviewed the family calendar. Atlanta. 3 days, then Dallas. 4 days, then Charlotte. 2 days. The travel schedule had doubled in only 4 months. He noticed the pattern. He said nothing. Over the following weeks, smaller details appeared. Gianna began locking her phone. Not dramatically, simply out of habit. Business calls moved from this kitchen into another room. Conference trips became 1 day longer than originally planned. Corporate dinners extended late into the evening. She explained each change logically. Traffic, delayed flights, unexpected meetings, additional clients. Every explanation sounded reasonable. Billy accepted each one exactly as she offered it. Outwardly. Internally, he remembered every date, every location, every schedule adjustment. His consulting work had trained him to recognize patterns long before problems became visible. Supply chains failed because small inconsistencies accumulated unnoticed. People often behaved the same way. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Billy stopped by the mailbox after returning from a client meeting in Murfreesboro. Among the usual envelopes sat a reimbursement statement accidentally delivered to the house instead of Gianna's corporate office. It wasn't confidential, only a printed summary. She had probably requested copies for tax purposes. Billy wasn't looking for anything unusual. He simply intended to place it beside her laptop. Then one number caught his attention. Hotel stay, 4 nights. Billy frowned. He clearly remembered Gianna telling Owen she would return after 3. Maybe the conference had been extended. Possible. He continued reading. Another reimbursement, executive dinner, another hotel breakfast, parking charges. Nothing individually alarming. Yet together they described an extra day that had never appeared on the family calendar. Billy folded the papers carefully. He placed them exactly where he had intended, beside Gianna's laptop. He never mentioned them, not because he hadn't noticed, because experience had taught him that conclusions reached too early often destroyed the truth hiding beneath them. That evening, Gianna thanked him for bringing in the mail. Billy smiled. "No problem." She picked up the reimbursement packet without realizing he had already seen it. Billy returned to helping Owen assemble a model suspension bridge for school. As wooden beams clicked into place across the dining room table, Billy studied the tiny structure. Strong bridges didn't collapse because of one broken piece. They failed after many unnoticed weaknesses aligned at exactly the wrong moment. He looked toward the hallway where Gianna was finishing another business call. Something inside him became very still, not angry, not afraid, simply attentive. For the first time, Billy quietly wondered whether the same principle might apply to his own marriage. Billy Watson never believed that suspicion was evidence. Years earlier, while consulting for a manufacturing company outside Memphis, he had watched an executive destroy his own career by accusing the wrong employee before the facts had been verified. The accusation made headlines. The correction never did. Since then, Billy had promised himself that if he ever faced betrayal in his own life, he would never allow emotion to move faster than proof. That promise quietly guided every decision he made. The reimbursement statement stayed where he had found it. Billy never mentioned the extra hotel night. He never searched through Gianna's phone. He never hired someone to follow her. Instead, he did what he understood best. He built a timeline. One evening, after Owen had gone upstairs to finish a history assignment, Billy opened a plain gray notebook that looked more like a contractor's ledger than anything important. Across the top of the first page, he wrote a single heading: Travel Schedule. Below it, he listed dates: Atlanta, Dallas, Charlotte, Chicago. Each conference occupied its own page. On the left side, he recorded the itinerary Gianna had shared with the family. On the right side, he entered information from reimbursement summaries that had legally reached their home through ordinary mail. He wasn't searching for guilt. He was searching for consistency. At first, the differences were minor: one extra breakfast, an additional parking charge, a hotel stay extended by several hours, nothing that would convince anyone of anything. But patterns were beginning to emerge. Billy understood patterns. Supply chains depended on them. So did fraud. The following Monday, Billy drove to Murfreesboro for a consulting assignment at a regional distribution center. The warehouse manager greeted him with a handshake. "Morning, Billy. Glad you could make it." Billy smiled. Let's see where the bottleneck starts. For the next 6 hours, he walked loading docks, observed forklift routes, timed outbound trailers, and quietly took notes. Employees appreciated working with him because he never blamed people before understanding the process. He asked questions. He listened. Only afterward did he recommend solutions. That same habit followed him home. When something felt wrong inside his own marriage, he refused to jump directly to conclusions. Late that afternoon, he received a call from an old colleague. "Still consulting?" "For now." "You ever think about taking another executive position?" Billy looked across the warehouse floor before answering. "I like solving problems." "You'd make more money." Billy smiled to himself. Money had never determined his decisions. "I already have enough." His friend laughed. "You're one of the few people I actually believe when they say that." Billy changed the subject. He always did. Very few people knew anything about his family's history, and he intended to keep it that way. Back in Franklin, Gianna returned home after another executive meeting in Nashville. She looked exhausted. "There may be another conference next month." Billy handed her a glass of water. "Where this time?" "Phoenix." "When?" "They're finalizing dates." Billy nodded once. "No problem." She smiled appreciatively. "Thanks for always understanding." He returned the smile. Travel comes with the job. Nothing in his expression suggested doubt. Nothing suggested he had begun documenting anything. 2 weeks later, another reimbursement summary arrived. Again, it wasn't confidential. Meridian Freight Solutions allowed executives to receive duplicate copies for tax documentation, if requested. Gianna had apparently forgotten to update the mailing preference after their last move. Billy unfolded the pages carefully. Phoenix, conference registration, hotel, meals, ground transportation. Everything looked routine, until he reached the final page. The conference officially ended Friday afternoon. The hotel invoice ended Saturday morning. One additional night, again. Billy compared the dates with the family calendar stored on the kitchen wall. Gianna had told Owen she would be home Friday evening. Instead, she had arrived Saturday before lunch. When Owen had asked why she was late, she had blamed weather delays. Billy opened his laptop. The National Weather Service archive showed clear skies across Phoenix and Nashville that entire weekend. He closed the browser. Still no conclusion. Only another inconsistency. That Friday evening, Owen sat beside Billy, assembling a model airplane. Dad. Yeah. Mom travels a lot now. She does. Do you miss her? Billy carefully attached one plastic wing. Sometimes. Owen looked down at the instruction booklet. I do too. Billy placed the glue aside. So when she's home, we make the time count. Owen nodded. Okay. Billy never wanted his son carrying adult burdens. Whatever happened between husband and wife belonged to adults. Children deserved stability, not confusion. The following Tuesday, Billy drove to downtown Nashville for a scheduled appointment. The office occupied the 18th floor of a quiet building overlooking the Cumberland River. The brass sign beside the reception desk read, Lawson and Pierce Corporate Counsel. Rebecca Lawson stood as Billy entered. She appeared to be in her early 50s, calm, sharply dressed, and impossible to intimidate. They had known each other professionally for years. Not because Billy often needed lawyers, because complicated business structures occasionally required careful legal advice. She offered coffee. Billy accepted. So, Rebecca began, what brings you here? Billy placed several neatly organized folders on the conference table. I need legal advice. About business. No. She waited. Billy appreciated that. She never interrupted silence. Finally, he spoke. I've noticed several inconsistencies involving my wife's business travel. Rebecca didn't immediately reach for the folders. Instead, she asked one question. What do you actually know? Billy answered without emotion. I know conference dates don't always match reimbursement records. What else? Nothing. What do you suspect? Billy looked out the window. I don't think that matters. Rebecca gave the smallest hint of a smile. Correct answer. She finally opened the folders. Inside were organized copies of travel schedules, reimbursement summaries, family calendars, and handwritten notes. No hidden recordings, no illegally obtained emails, no photographs. Everything had been gathered lawfully. Rebecca looked impressed. You've done this carefully. I wanted to stay within the law. You have. She closed the folder. Then here's my advice. Billy listened without writing anything down. You do absolutely nothing. He nodded. Nothing. Nothing that could be interpreted as harassment, surveillance, or confrontation. What if my suspicions are right? Rebecca folded her hands. Then evidence will eventually become stronger. And if I'm wrong, then you'll be grateful you never accused your wife without proof. Billy considered that quietly. Rebecca continued. Facts first, feelings second. Billy recognized the principle immediately. It was exactly how he approached every consulting assignment. She handed him the folder. If new information appears naturally and legally, preserve it. No private investigators. Not yet? No confrontation. Not until facts become undeniable. Billy stood. Thank you. Rebecca stopped him before he reached the door. There's someone I'd like you to meet. An hour later, Billy entered another office across the hall. Stacks of financial reports covered nearly every available surface. A man wearing reading glasses looked up from 3 computer monitors. Michael Brooks. Billy shook his hand. Nice to meet you. Rebecca made the introduction. Michael is one of the best forensic accountants I've ever worked with. Michael smiled modestly. I look for numbers that don't behave normally. Billy placed several reimbursement summaries on the desk. Michael scanned them without speaking. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, Michael circled several entries with a pencil. Interesting. Billy leaned forward. What? Michael pointed toward one column. Individually, these expenses mean almost nothing. Billy waited. But together... He turned another page. They suggest a pattern worth watching. Billy felt no satisfaction, only a deeper sense of caution. The facts were beginning to organize themselves, but they were not finished speaking. As Billy left the building that afternoon, Rebecca called after him. Remember, he turned. Don't chase the truth. Billy nodded. Let it come to you. Driving home beneath the late afternoon Tennessee sun, Billy repeated those words silently. He had no idea how important they would soon become. The departure board at Nashville International Airport blinked from boarding to departed. Billy Watson watched the status change without moving. The aircraft carrying Gianna and Meridian Freight Solutions Chief Operating Officer Ryan Caldwell slowly backed away from Gate B-14 before disappearing beyond the terminal windows. Around him, travelers gathered their carry-on bags and hurried toward their own flights. Within less than 2 minutes, the gate that had witnessed one of the most painful moments of his marriage looked perfectly ordinary again. Only Owen remained frozen. His small backpack rested against his legs. He stared through the glass long after the airplane had disappeared. Dad, he finally whispered. Billy looked down. What is it, buddy? Owen swallowed hard. Did Mom forget us? The question landed harder than anything Billy had heard that morning. For one brief second, he wanted to tell the truth exactly as he understood it. No, she didn't forget. She chose. But children deserved protection from conflicts they had no power to solve. Billy knelt until they were eye level. I don't know exactly what happened yet. Owen searched his father's face. Are you mad? Billy forced a calm smile. I'm disappointed. At Mom. Billy paused. I'm disappointed that we're standing here instead of sitting on the airplane together. The answer wasn't complete, but it was honest. Owen nodded slowly. Billy picked up both carry-on bags. Come on. Where are we going? First, we're going to find someone who can help us. They walked toward the customer service counter, where a line of frustrated passengers already stretched across the terminal. Weather delays, lost baggage, canceled connections. Everyone seemed to have a problem. Billy quietly took his place at the end of the line. He checked the time. 7:42 a.m. Not once did he reach for his phone to call Gianna. Not once did he send an angry text. His silence wasn't weakness. It was discipline. Nearly 25 minutes later, a customer service representative greeted them. Good morning. How can I help you? Billy handed over his identification. I believe our reservation was modified. The representative typed quickly. After several seconds, her expression changed. Just one moment. She called a supervisor. The supervisor arrived almost immediately. He reviewed the reservation history before looking back at Billy. Mr. Watson? Yes. I'm sorry. Billy waited. It appears your original reservation included 3 passengers. Billy nodded. It did. The booking was changed online approximately 2 hours before departure. Billy remained expressionless. Changed how... The supervisor rotated the monitor slightly. 2 passengers were removed. Billy already knew the answer. Who authorized the change? I'm afraid I can't disclose account information. I understand. The supervisor hesitated. However, Billy looked up. I can provide a printed history showing when the reservation was modified. That would be appreciated. Within minutes, several sheets of paper slid across the counter. Timestamp, confirmation number, seat reassignment, passenger removal, everything documented. Billy folded the pages carefully and placed them inside his leather briefcase. No dramatic reaction, no raised voice, no demands. The supervisor looked almost surprised. Most people would be furious. Billy smiled politely. Being furious won't change the flight. The supervisor nodded slowly. I suppose not. What are our options? There are 2 seats available this afternoon. Billy glanced toward Owen. What time? 3:45. We'll take them. The tickets were reissued. The supervisor waived the change fees after reviewing the unusual circumstances. Before leaving the counter, Billy extended his hand. Thank you. The supervisor shook it. I hope things work out. So do I. They walked toward a quiet seating area overlooking the runway. Owen remained unusually silent. Normally, airports fascinated him. He loved watching aircraft taxi toward the runway. He counted airline logos. He guessed destinations. Today, he watched nothing. Billy opened one of the homemade sandwiches he had packed before sunrise. Turkey. Owen shook his head. I'm not hungry. Billy unwrapped only half of his own sandwich. After a few bites, he quietly folded the other half back into the paper. Neither of them had much appetite. After several minutes, Owen finally spoke. Did I do something wrong? Billy looked at him immediately. No. Then why didn't Mom wait? Billy chose every word carefully. Sometimes adults make decisions that children don't understand. Do you understand? Billy looked through the terminal windows before answering. I'm still trying to. Owen leaned against his father's shoulder. Billy placed an arm around him. No speeches, no promises, just presence. An hour later, Billy's phone vibrated. Rebecca Lawson. He answered immediately. Rebecca, I've been trying to reach you. We were at the airline counter. I heard. Billy frowned slightly. Heard from who? Michael called me. Michael Brooks had known Billy and Owen were scheduled to fly that morning because they had briefly discussed travel dates during their last meeting. What happened? Rebecca asked. Billy explained everything exactly as it occurred. No exaggeration, no assumptions, only facts. The reservation originally had 3 passengers. Go on. It was modified 2 hours before departure. Documentation. The airline printed the change history. Good. Owen and I were removed. Rebecca remained silent for several seconds. Finally, she spoke. Don't lose those records. They're already secured. Excellent. Billy leaned forward. Why? Because timing matters. He understood immediately. You think this could become relevant? I think every verified event belongs on the timeline. Billy looked toward Owen, who had finally fallen asleep across 2 airport chairs. Rebecca continued. There's something else. I'm listening. The audit committee officially voted this morning. Billy waited. They've opened a formal internal review. He absorbed the information quietly. So it begins. Yes. What triggered it? Michael's preliminary financial analysis raised enough questions to justify a broader examination. Billy didn't celebrate. A formal review proved nothing. It simply meant professionals would now examine the records independently, exactly as they should. Rebecca lowered her voice. "One more thing." "What?" "I need you available." "For what?" "I can't explain over the phone." Billy immediately recognized the seriousness in her tone. "Is this about Meridian?" "Indirectly." "When?" "Possibly within the next 48 hours. Billy glanced at the departure board. "I'll be home tonight?" "Good. We'll talk then." The call ended. Billy slipped the phone back into his pocket. For several minutes, he simply watched aircraft take off one after another. Each one followed established procedures: taxi, clearance, acceleration, rotation. Nothing happened out of a sequence. Just as Billy often believed should work the same way. Not quickly. Correctly. Around noon, Owen finally woke. "Did I sleep?" "You did." "Did Mom call?" Billy looked at his silent phone. "No." Owen nodded without saying anything else. That silence hurt more than tears. As the afternoon flight approached, Billy purchased 2 notebooks from an airport gift shop. He handed one to Owen. "For the trip?" Billy smiled. "For whatever you want." Owen opened the first page. He wrote only one sentence. Dad stayed. Billy saw the words but pretended not to. Some moments belonged only to a child. At 3:10 p.m., passengers began boarding the replacement flight. Billy stood. He picked up the bags. As they walked toward the gate scanner, his phone vibrated once more. This time the message came from an unknown New York number. There were only 2 sentences. "Mr. Watson, this is James Whitmore. The trustees request your presence in New York immediately after your return." Billy read the message twice. Then he quietly slipped the phone back into his pocket. Whatever had just begun was no longer only about his marriage. It had become something much larger. Billy and Owen returned to Franklin just after sunset. The drive home from Nashville was quieter than either of them expected. Owen spent most of the trip looking out the passenger side window, while Billy concentrated on the road ahead. The replacement flight had landed safely, but nothing about the day felt normal anymore. When they pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on. Billy carried both suitcases inside, while Owen headed upstairs to shower. Only then did Billy remove his phone from his pocket. 3 missed calls. 2 from Rebecca Lawson, 1 from James Whitmore. There was also a single text message from Gianna. "Flight landed safely. Busy with meetings. Talk later." Billy read the message twice. Nothing in it acknowledged that her husband and son had been removed from the reservation. Nothing asked whether they had made another flight. Nothing even mentioned Owen. Billy locked the screen without replying. 10 minutes later, his phone rang again. "James Whitmore." Billy answered immediately. "Good evening, James." "Good evening, Billy." James Whitmore's voice remained calm, measured, and unmistakably formal, despite having known Billy since childhood. "Are you home?" "I just arrived." "Good, we need to meet." "I received your message." "This cannot wait." Billy glanced toward the staircase to make sure Owen remained upstairs. "How serious is it?" James paused. "Serious enough that the trustees voted unanimously." Billy understood exactly what that meant. The trustees almost never voted unanimously. When? Tomorrow morning. Where? Our Nashville office. Billy frowned slightly. "I thought you wanted New York." "We did." "What changed?" "You'll understand after tomorrow's meeting." Billy accepted the answer. James never revealed information over unsecured phone calls. "I'll be there." 9 o'clock. The call ended. Billy remained standing in the kitchen for several moments. Very few people in this world even knew James Whitmore existed. Fewer still understood his connection to the Watson family. To outsiders, Billy Watson appeared to be an ordinary logistics consultant. To James Whitmore, Billy represented something entirely different. A responsibility carried across 4 generations. The following morning, Laura Watson arrived just before 8. Billy's older sister hugged Owen tightly before smiling at her younger brother. "You look exhausted." "I've had a long couple of days." "I heard." Billy looked surprised. "James called you?" Laura nodded. "He said you might need someone to stay with Owen." Billy smiled gratefully. "Thank you." "You don't have to thank family." Laura had inherited their mother's practical personality. She never asked unnecessary questions. She simply appeared whenever someone needed help. As Billy picked up his weathered leather briefcase, Laura stopped him. "Whatever happens today," Billy looked back, "remember who you are." He smiled slightly. "I try every day." The drive to downtown Nashville took just under 30 minutes. James Whitmore's office occupied the top floor of a quiet limestone building with no company logo displayed outside. The receptionist recognized Billy immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Watson." "Morning." "No one else has arrived yet." Billy nodded politely. 5 minutes later, James entered carrying several leather-bound folders. Although now in his early 70s, he still stood straight with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades advising boards of directors and family trusts. He extended his hand. "Billy." "James." They entered a private conference room. Once the door closed, James placed one of the folders on the table. "You know why your grandfather created the trust?" Billy nodded. "To preserve the family businesses." James smiled faintly. That was only part of the reason. He opened the folder. Inside rested photographs nearly 70 years old. Black and white images showed Billy's grandfather, Thomas Watson, standing beside several freight trucks outside a small warehouse. "In 1958, James began, your grandfather owned exactly 3 trucks. Billy had heard parts of the story before, never all of it. He believed transportation wasn't simply about moving freight. James turned another page. It was about keeping promises. Another photograph appeared. The company had grown. 20 trucks, then 50. Then regional distribution centers. He reinvested almost every dollar. Billy remained silent. He also distrusted publicity. James smiled. He used to say that attention attracted the wrong people. Billy almost laughed. That sounded exactly like his grandfather. "When Thomas died," James continued, "most people believed the family businesses had been sold. They weren't." "No." James opened another document. Instead of selling, Thomas Watson transferred ownership into what eventually became the Watson Heritage Trust. Not because he wanted secrecy, because he wanted stability. The trust couldn't be inherited like ordinary wealth. It couldn't be divided during divorces. It couldn't be dismantled by short-term investors. Its purpose was simple: protect businesses that employed thousands of families. Billy looked at the document quietly. "I remember my father explaining that." James nodded. "Your father served as trustee after Thomas. And after Dad died, you accepted the responsibility." Billy had been only 32, far younger than anyone expected. Many professionals questioned whether someone so young should oversee billions of dollars in long-term assets. Within 5 years, Billy had earned every trustee's confidence, not through dramatic decisions, through patient ones. James reached another page. "This is the current ownership structure." The diagram appeared surprisingly simple. At the top stood Watson Heritage Trust. Below it, Blue Summit Capital. Beneath Blue Summit rested several transportation, logistics, manufacturing, and infrastructure companies spread across the country. One name immediately caught Billy's attention: Meridian Freight Solutions. James watched his reaction. You already knew. Billy nodded slowly. I knew Blue Summit held a controlling interest. But I've never involved myself in operations. Correct. That separation had always been intentional. The trustee protected ownership. Professional executives managed daily business. Billy had refused board seats for years because he believed concentrated authority often produced poor judgment. James leaned back. Your grandfather insisted on one principle. Billy finished the sentence before he could. Ownership and management are not the same. James smiled. You still remember. Billy remembered everything. As trustee, he voted on major governance matters. He approved directors. He protected long-term strategy. He did not interfere with hiring, marketing, sales, or daily operations. The system had worked for decades. Until now. James folded his hands. The audit committee contacted Blue Summit yesterday. Billy listened carefully. They requested access to ownership records. They're entitled to them. They are. So why am I here? James looked directly at him. Because once the committee verifies the ownership chain. Billy already understood. So, they'll discover Meridian ultimately answers to the trust. James nodded. And who serves as sole voting trustee? Billy said nothing. The title had never mattered to him. It was simply a duty, not an identity. James continued. Your personal circumstances have suddenly become relevant. Billy remained composed. I will not interfere. I know. I won't influence the investigation. I know. I won't ask for special treatment. James smiled. That's exactly why the trustees continue trusting you. Another folder slid across the table. Inside rested emergency meeting notices, board resolutions, legal memoranda, voting procedures. Everything had already been prepared. Billy read each page carefully. Finally, he looked up. When is the meeting? 2 days. In New York. Blue Summit headquarters. Billy closed the folder. Will Gianna know before then? No. Ryan Caldwell? No. The Meridian Board. They know ownership will be clarified. But not by whom? James nodded. Correct. Silence settled over the room. Billy stood and walked toward the window overlooking downtown Nashville. For years he had intentionally remained invisible. He attended trustee meetings quietly, avoided interviews, declined awards. Most executives across Blue Summit had never met him in person. That anonymity had protected both him and the businesses. Now circumstances threatened to remove that protection. James joined him at the window. Your grandfather once told me something. Billy looked over. What was it? He said real authority isn't proven by announcing it. James paused. It's proven by how carefully you use it. Billy looked back across the skyline. I hope I remember that. James placed one hand gently on his shoulder. I've watched you for 14 years. Billy turned. You've never given me a reason to doubt it. For the first time since standing at Gate B14, Billy felt something resembling certainty. Not certainty about his marriage, not certainty about Gianna, but certainty that whatever happened next would not be decided by anger. It would be decided by truth evidence and the responsibility his grandfather had entrusted to him years before. As Billy left the building, his phone vibrated once again. This time the notification came from Meridian Freight Solutions. An official email announced an emergency executive board meeting in New York. Attendance mandatory. Billy looked at the message for only a moment before slipping the phone back into his pocket. The quiet life he had protected for years was about to become impossible to hide. The emergency board meeting remained 48 hours away, but preparations had already begun long before anyone inside Meridian Freight Solutions realized how much was about to change. At Blue Summit Capital's headquarters in Manhattan, attorneys assembled governance documents in secure conference rooms. Corporate secretaries reviewed shareholder records. Compliance officers verified board resolutions that had not been examined in years. Everything followed procedure. Nothing happened because of Billy's personal situation. That distinction mattered to everyone involved, especially Billy. Early Thursday morning, Billy sat alone in his home office in Franklin. His computer displayed 3 windows side by side. One contained his consulting work for a distribution client. Another displayed emails from Blue Summit's legal department. The third remained blank, except for a growing checklist he had created for himself. Remain impartial. Protect confidential information. Avoid contact with Meridian executives. Follow governance procedures. He read the list twice before saving it. No matter what happened between him and Gianna, his responsibilities as trustee remained unchanged. He refused to let personal disappointment influence professional judgment. Downstairs, Owen called from the kitchen. "Dad, I'm leaving for school." Billy closed the laptop and walked downstairs. "You remembered your science project." Owen held up a carefully wrapped model bridge. "I almost forgot." Billy smiled. "Good thing somebody checked." Owen laughed for the first time since the airport. Laura Watson waited outside in her SUV. Because Billy needed to travel the following day, she had volunteered to help with school pickups and baseball practice. As Owen climbed into the passenger seat, he rolled down the window. "Will you be home tomorrow night?" Billy answered honestly. "I'm going to try." "You always do." The simple confidence in his son's voice stayed with Billy long after Laura drove away. Inside Meridian Freight Solutions headquarters in Nashville, the atmosphere felt entirely different. Employees noticed unusual activity without understanding its cause. Several members of the finance department had been asked to produce expense records from the previous 18 months. Internal auditors requested executive travel documentation. Information technology specialists received instructions to preserve email archives rather than delete routine backups. Nothing publicly suggested misconduct. Officially, the company described the process as a standard governance review. Unofficially, rumors spread through every department before lunch. Someone whispered that investors were considering a merger. Another employee believed layoffs were coming. Others assumed new financing had been approved. Nobody guessed the real reason. On the executive floor, Ryan Caldwell appeared remarkably calm. He leaned comfortably against the doorway of Gianna's office while holding a cup of coffee. "So," he said casually, "looks like another audit." Gianna sighed. "They happen every year." Ryan shrugged. "This one feels bigger." "You worried?" He laughed. "About expense reports?" She smiled. "Neither am I." Ryan walked toward the conference room. "We'll answer their questions." As always, neither of them realized that this review had already expanded beyond ordinary financial procedures. Later that morning, Meridian's chief financial officer received a confidential request from Blue Summit Capital. The request contained only 3 items: executive travel expenses, corporate approval records, digital authorization logs. Every document requested already existed. No one needed to create new reports. No one needed to explain anything. The records would speak for themselves. Several states away, Michael Brooks sat surrounded by spreadsheets. Forensic accounting required patience more than brilliance. He had spent decades discovering financial inconsistencies hidden beneath perfectly balanced statements. His desk contained reimbursement records from dozens of executive trips, hotels, flights, meals, ground transportation, conference registrations. Individually, every expense appeared reasonable. Collectively, certain patterns deserved closer attention. Michael never assumed intent. He simply followed numbers wherever they led. His phone rang. "Michael?" Rebecca Lawson's voice answered. "Any progress?" "A little." "What have you found?" Michael adjusted his glasses before replying. "I've identified repeated discrepancies between approved travel schedules and submitted reimbursement dates. Enough to draw conclusions. No. Rebecca appreciated the answer. What do you have? Enough to justify additional questions. Good. He paused. There's something else. I'm listening. The approval logs. Rebecca became noticeably quieter. What about them? Several executive expense approvals originated from the same digital authorization account. Is that unusual? Not necessarily. But I'd like to verify whether the authorized executive was actually present when those approvals were submitted. Rebecca immediately understood. If someone used another person's credentials, Michael finished the sentence. The timestamps will eventually reveal it. Still no accusations. Only another path toward evidence. That afternoon, Billy received an encrypted email from James Whitmore. Attached were the finalized ownership charts that would be presented during the New York board meeting. Billy reviewed them carefully. The ownership chain looked straightforward. Watson Heritage Trust, Blue Summit Capital, Meridian Freight Solutions. The simplicity surprised most people who eventually saw it. Large organizations often appeared complicated from the outside. In reality, ownership frequently rested on remarkably clear legal structures. Billy closed the file without printing it. Confidential information never left encrypted storage. His phone rang moments later. Rebecca. Everything all right? She asked. Yes. Have you reviewed tomorrow's agenda? I have. And Billy leaned back in his chair. I keep wondering whether I should excuse myself. Rebecca answered immediately. No. Why? Because your position isn't under review? My marriage is. She paused. The board isn't meeting to discuss your marriage. Billy understood. The board is meeting to fulfill its fiduciary responsibilities. Exactly. And if those responsibilities eventually affect someone I know, Rebecca spoke carefully, then governance requires fairness. Billy smiled slightly. I suppose that's why procedures exist. They protect everyone, including people under investigation, including innocent people, including Billy himself. After ending the call, Billy drove to Owen's baseball practice. For nearly 2 hours, corporate ownership audits and board meetings disappeared from his thoughts. He watched children chase fly balls beneath a bright Tennessee sky. He applauded every good play. He laughed when one player accidentally ran toward third base instead of first. Life still contained ordinary moments. Billy intended to protect them for as long as possible. Practice ended just after sunset. On the drive home, Owen asked quietly, Are you traveling tomorrow? I am. For work. Billy considered the question. In a way. Will it take long? I'll come home as soon as I can. Owen nodded. Can we still go fishing this weekend? Billy smiled. That's still the plan. I hope nothing changes. Billy looked at his son for a brief second before returning his attention to the road. So do I. Late that evening, more than 800 miles away in Manhattan, Blue Summit's independent directors gathered for a private briefing. Charles Bennett, chairman of the board, reviewed the agenda. We will follow standard governance procedures. No one disagreed. Elizabeth Harper, lead independent director, looked around the room. Personal relationships remain irrelevant. Several directors nodded. Our responsibility is to the company. And its shareholders. And the trust beneficiaries. Charles closed the meeting folder. Tomorrow we verify ownership. Then we hear the audit findings. Then we act. Everything would occur in that order. No shortcuts, no surprises. Meanwhile, inside a luxury hotel overlooking Central Park, Gianna reviewed the presentation she planned to deliver the next morning. revenue growth, operational improvements, expansion initiatives. She wanted to impress Blue Summit's directors. Ryan knocked lightly on her hotel room door. "Ready for tomorrow?" She smiled confidently. "As ready as I've ever been." "You think this meeting is about the audit?" "Probably." Ryan shrugged. "We'll handle it." Neither of them suspected that the meeting's most important presentation would not be theirs. Back in Franklin, Billy packed a single overnight bag. One navy suit, one white dress shirt, one conservative tie. Nothing expensive. Nothing designed to attract attention. Before going to bed, he stopped outside Owen's bedroom. The 11-year-old had already fallen asleep with a baseball magazine resting across his chest. Billy quietly removed the magazine and pulled the blanket higher around his shoulders. As he switched off the hallway light, his phone displayed tomorrow's itinerary. Flight to New York. Blue Summit headquarters. Emergency board meeting. Billy looked at the schedule one final time. By tomorrow afternoon, people who had overlooked him for years would finally learn who he really was. The revelation would not come from anger. It would not come from revenge. It would come from corporate records that had been quietly waiting for someone to read them. Friday morning began long before sunrise. Billy Watson arrived at Nashville International Airport carrying the same weathered leather briefcase he had used for nearly a decade. Travelers around him hurried toward security checkpoints with coffee cups in one hand and boarding passes in the other. Nobody recognized him. Nobody looked twice at the quiet man wearing a navy suit that had been carefully maintained rather than recently purchased. Billy preferred it that way. He boarded the first flight to New York without requesting priority boarding or an upgraded seat. His ticket had been booked in business class. Not because he demanded it, because Blue Summit Capital required trustees to travel under specific corporate security policies whenever attending governance meetings. Billy spent the flight reading governance documents instead of watching movies. Every page emphasized the same principles: objectivity, transparency, fiduciary duty, confidentiality. He had read them countless times over the years. Today they seemed more important than ever. Meanwhile, several rows ahead, Gianna and Ryan Caldwell occupied seats on a different flight departing Nashville for New York. Ryan looked unusually relaxed. He closed his laptop and stretched comfortably. "You look nervous." Gianna sighed. "I don't like surprise board meetings. They're probably discussing expansion." "Then why involve the audit committee?" Ryan shrugged. "Corporate politics." Gianna looked through the cabin window. "I've worked too hard to let politics get in the way." Ryan smiled confidently. "They'd be foolish to question your performance." She appreciated the reassurance. During the previous 3 years, she had consistently exceeded operational targets. Delivery times had improved, regional profits had increased, employee retention had stabilized. Her resume reflected genuine accomplishments. She believed those achievements would protect her. She had no reason to think otherwise. Neither of them noticed the older gentleman seated several rows behind them, quietly reading a financial newspaper. Charles Bennett rarely announced himself. The chairman of Blue Summit Capital preferred observing before speaking. He had intentionally booked a commercial flight instead of using the corporate aircraft. Executives often behaved differently when they believed no directors were nearby. Charles never interrupted conversations. He simply listened. Ryan never looked back. Gianna never realized the chairman occupied the same aircraft. By mid-morning, black sedans carrying directors and executives began arriving outside Blue Summit Capital's headquarters in Manhattan. The building rose 42 stories above Midtown. Its exterior reflected neighboring skyscrapers in polished glass. Security officers checked every visitor. Electronic badges were issued individually. Every arrival was documented. Billy entered through a private reception area reserved for trustees and board members. The receptionist greeted him warmly. "Good morning, Mr. Watson." "Good morning." "Mr. Whitmore is waiting." James stood near the elevator. You made good time. So did you. They rode upward in silence. Neither man discussed the meeting. Important conversations waited until secure rooms. On the 39th floor, James opened a conference room overlooking Central Park. Breakfast had already been prepared. Coffee, fruit, pastries. Billy poured himself a cup of black coffee before opening his notebook. James noticed. You still take notes by hand. I remember them better. James smiled. So did your grandfather. Across the building, Meridian executives gathered in a separate waiting area. Gianna greeted colleagues from operations. Ryan exchanged handshakes with finance executives. Several board members from Meridian chatted quietly near the windows. Nobody appeared especially worried. The invitation described the meeting as an expanded governance review. Most expected routine presentations, followed by strategic planning discussions. The atmosphere remained surprisingly relaxed. Until Rebecca Lawson entered, carrying 2 locked document cases. Conversation immediately slowed. Few executives recognized her. Those who did understood she rarely attended meetings unless significant legal matters required attention. Ryan leaned toward Gianna. Who's she? Outside counsel. For Blue Summit. I think so. Ryan frowned. Interesting. Before either could speculate further, another unfamiliar face entered. Michael Brooks. He carried nothing except a slim laptop case. Gianna whispered, Do you know him? Ryan shook his head. No. Michael quietly accepted his visitor badge before walking directly toward Rebecca. Neither smiled. Neither spoke more than a few words. They disappeared through secured doors. Ryan watched them leave. Definitely an audit. Gianna nodded slowly. Looks like it. Neither realized that neither Rebecca nor Michael reported to Meridian. 11 o'clock arrived. An assistant announced, The board will convene in 15 minutes. Executives gathered their presentation folders. Gianna reviewed her operational summary one final time. Revenue charts, fleet utilization, expansion proposals. She had prepared for hours. She intended to leave an impression. Elsewhere, Billy reviewed no presentation at all. His role required no speech, only attendance. James noticed Billy's calm expression. Nervous? Billy smiled faintly. I've learned that nerves don't improve judgment. James chuckled softly. No. They usually replace it. 5 minutes before the meeting, Charles Bennett entered the trustee conference room. Billy? Charles. The chairman extended his hand. I appreciate you coming. It was necessary. Charles nodded. I wish the circumstances were different. So do I. Charles lowered his voice. For what it's worth. Billy looked at him. Every director understands the importance of separating personal matters from governance. Billy appreciated the reassurance. I expect nothing less. Charles studied him for a moment. You know, what? I've chaired boards for nearly 30 years. Billy waited. I've watched executives demand special treatment because of friendships. Charles smiled slightly. I've never once seen you ask for any. Billy answered quietly. The rules only matter if they apply equally. Charles nodded with obvious respect. At exactly 11:30 a.m., both conference rooms opened simultaneously. Meridian executives entered through one entrance. Blue Summit directors entered through another. The boardroom itself reflected decades of corporate history. A polished walnut table stretched nearly 40 feet. Large windows overlooked Manhattan. State-of-the-art monitors lined one wall. Every chair displayed a printed nameplate. Gianna located hers immediately. Vice President of Operations. Ryan found his seat beside the Chief Financial Officer. Conversation continued quietly as people settled. Then Gianna noticed something unusual. 3 seats at the far end of the table remained empty. Their nameplates faced away from most attendees. She couldn't read them. Ryan noticed as well. Who's missing? No idea. Several directors glanced toward the entrance as if waiting for someone important. The room gradually became silent. Charles Bennett entered first. Everyone stood automatically. Good morning. Good morning. He invited everyone to sit. Then, instead of beginning the meeting, he looked toward the doorway once more. We'll wait another moment. Gianna exchanged a quick glance with Ryan. More waiting. That almost never happened. Less than 30 seconds later, James Whitmore entered. Most Meridian executives didn't recognize him. They assumed he was another attorney. He carried a single leather folder, nothing more. James walked calmly toward one of the empty seats. He did not sit. Instead, he stood quietly beside it. Rebecca Lawson entered next. Then Michael Brooks. Both took their assigned places. One chair remained empty. Charles checked his watch. Perfect timing. He looked toward the open doorway. Everyone else instinctively turned as well. Billy Watson walked into the room. No security escort, no announcement, no dramatic entrance. He simply entered carrying his worn leather briefcase. Gianna looked up casually. For a brief second, she smiled in surprise. Billy? Why was he here? Had he somehow traveled to New York after missing the flight? Confusion replaced surprise almost immediately. Ryan frowned. What is he doing here? Gianna whispered. I have no idea. Billy acknowledged no one. He neither searched for Gianna nor looked toward Ryan. Instead, he greeted Charles Bennett with a polite handshake. Then James Whitmore. Then Elizabeth Harper. Finally, Rebecca Lawson. Each greeted him with unmistakable professional respect. The room became noticeably quieter. Several Meridian executives exchanged puzzled looks. How did Billy know the chairman was outside counsel greeting him first? Billy reached the final empty chair. The nameplate faced outward. He gently turned it toward himself before taking his seat. From across the table, Gianna finally saw the engraved words. Mr. Billy Watson, sole voting trustee, Watson Heritage Trust. The color slowly drained from her face. Ryan stared at the nameplate without blinking. Around the room, confused whispers died almost instantly. Charles Bennett looked around the table. Ladies and gentlemen. He paused just long enough for complete silence to settle over the room. I believe we are now ready to begin. No one spoke for several seconds after Charles Bennett called the meeting to order. The silence wasn't awkward, it was analytical. Every executive in the room had just recalculated everything they believed they knew about Billy Watson. Gianna remained perfectly still. Her eyes shifted from Billy to the engraved nameplate before returning to Charles Bennett. There had to be some mistake. Billy was an independent logistics consultant. He drove a 12-year-old pickup truck. He packed lunches. He wore inexpensive watches. He never discussed corporate investments. Nothing about him suggested authority over a multi-billion-dollar ownership structure. Ryan leaned slightly toward her. Did you know? Gianna answered without taking her eyes off Billy. No. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I swear I didn't. Charles Bennett folded his hands on the polished walnut table. Before we begin today's agenda, I'd like to welcome everyone. His tone remained calm and measured. As you know, Blue Summit Capital periodically conducts governance reviews across its portfolio companies. Several executives nodded. These reviews exist to protect shareholders, employees, customers, and the long-term health of every organization under our stewardship. No one objected. The statement reflected standard corporate practice. Charles continued. Today's meeting includes 3 separate presentations. He looked around the room. First, confirmation of governance and ownership. Second, findings from the audit committee. Third, discussion of any actions that may become necessary after those findings. Everything followed the agenda distributed 24 hours earlier. Nothing had changed. The only difference was that everyone now understood Billy belonged in the room. Charles turned toward James Whitmore. "Mr. Whitmore." James stood carrying only a slim folder. A large monitor behind him illuminated with a simple organizational chart. No colorful graphics, no dramatic animation, just names connected by clean black lines. At the top appeared one entity, Watson Heritage Trust. James spoke clearly. "For those unfamiliar with today's governance review, I will briefly explain the ownership structure." He pressed a remote. A second box appeared. Blue Summit Capital. The Watson Heritage Trust serves as the controlling owner of Blue Summit Capital. Another click. Several transportation companies appeared beneath Blue Summit. Rail, logistics, warehousing, distribution. Finally, Meridian Freight Solutions appeared near the center of the screen. The trust's ownership has remained unchanged for 14 years. James looked around the room. Operational management has always remained independent. He intentionally emphasized the distinction. The trust establishes governance. Professional executives manage daily business. Another click. The final slide appeared. Sole voting trustee, Billy Watson. Appointment date, 14 years earlier. Current status. Active. Several executives quietly exchanged glances. A regional operations director blinked twice before looking towards Billy again. The company's chief information officer leaned back in his chair, clearly trying to process the information. Billy remained expressionless. He neither acknowledged the attention nor seemed interested in it. James closed the presentation. The trustee has never participated in Meridian's daily operations. He looked directly toward the executive section. He does not approve travel expenses. He does not supervise employees. He does not participate in executive evaluations. He does not influence internal audits. Every sentence removed another possible misunderstanding. James concluded. The governance structure intentionally separates ownership from management. Charles Bennett nodded. "Thank you." James returned to his seat. The chairman looked toward Billy. "Mr. Watson, would you care to make any opening remarks?" Every eye in the room turned toward him. Billy slowly stood. His voice remained calm. "Only one." He looked around the table. "I'm here today as trustee." He paused. "Nothing more. My personal relationships with anyone in this room will not influence my responsibilities." Another brief pause. "I expect the facts to speak before any opinions." Without another word, he sat down. The statement lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet its effect reached every person present. Elizabeth Harper quietly made a note. Professional, appropriate, limited, exactly what governance required. Charles resumed the meeting. "Thank you." He looked toward Rebecca Lawson. "Counsel, do you have anything to add regarding procedure?" Rebecca stood. "Only for clarification." She addressed the entire room. "Today's review follows established governance rules. No conclusions have been reached. No disciplinary decisions have been made. No individual should interpret today's proceedings as evidence of wrongdoing." She deliberately slowed her delivery. "The purpose of this meeting is to review verified information." She closed her folder. Nothing else. Again, the room relaxed slightly. Even Gianna seemed to breathe more easily. Whatever this meeting became, it would not begin with accusations. Charles turned to another director. "Any procedural objections?" "None." "Very well." He looked towards Michael Brooks. "The audit committee may proceed." Michael connected his laptop to the presentation system. Unlike most corporate presentations, his contained almost no graphics, rows of dates, expense summaries, approval histories, travel schedules, pure data. He adjusted his glasses. My responsibility is limited. He spoke in a steady voice. I neither determine intent nor recommend disciplinary action. I only analyze records. The first slide appeared. Executive Travel Review. Observation period, 18 months, total trips, reviewed, 146. Michael continued. Most records matched company policy. Another slide. Several required additional verification. Still no names, still no accusations. Only numbers. He displayed a chart comparing planned conference schedules with reimbursement submissions. The majority aligned completely. He highlighted a small section. A limited number contained timing inconsistencies. Ryan shifted slightly in his chair. Gianna watched silently. Michael remained focused on the screen. Timing inconsistencies alone do not indicate misconduct. He deliberately clarified the point. They simply require explanation. Another slide appeared. Corporate authorization review. Michael continued. We also examined digital approval histories. Again, nothing sensational. Only timestamps. Authorization records. System logs. Charles Bennett interrupted briefly. For the benefit of everyone present. Michael nodded. Please explain why these records matter. Michael answered immediately. Every executive expense requires documented authorization. If approval records differ from travel records, we verify whether both remain accurate. Standard procedure. Nothing unusual. Another slide appeared. Summary. Additional verification required. Several executives visibly relaxed. No one had been singled out. No one had been accused. Ryan quietly leaned toward Gianna again. I told you. She nodded. So far. Michael clicked once more. The next section concerns a smaller group of travel records. He paused. Before presenting individual examples, I'd like to verify one procedural matter. He looked toward Rebecca. Rebecca nodded once. Michael turned toward Charles. Mr. Chairman, permission to distribute supporting documents. Granted. Assistants entered carrying sealed envelopes. One envelope rested before every director. One before every Meridian executive. One before Billy. No one opened them immediately. Charles spoke first. The documents remain confidential until instructed otherwise. Everyone acknowledged the instruction. Michael waited until the assistants exited. These materials contain copies of original corporate records. No summaries. No interpretations. Only source documents. Billy quietly rested both hands on the unopened envelope. He had never seen the contents. He intentionally avoided reviewing investigative materials before the committee completed its work. Objectivity required distance. Across the table, Gianna noticed that Billy hadn't even touched the seal. For reasons she couldn't explain, that unsettled her more than anything else. If he had wanted revenge, wouldn't he already know what was inside? Charles looked toward Michael. You may continue. Michael nodded. I'll begin with the first documented example. He reached for the remote. A single date appeared on the screen. Atlanta, 18 months earlier. Billy recognized it immediately. It was the conference that had first caused him to begin quietly recording dates in his gray notebook. The room remained silent. No one yet understood why that ordinary business trip had become the starting point of a much larger story. The conference room remained completely silent as the first document appeared on the large screen. Atlanta Executive Leadership Conference. Departure Monday 8:15 a.m. Scheduled return Wednesday 6:40 p.m. Michael Brooks spoke without changing his calm tone. This document represents the original travels authorization approved before the conference. He clicked once. A second document appeared beside it. Hotel reimbursement. Check-in Monday. Check-out Thursday morning. The difference was immediately visible. One additional night, Michael continued. Standing alone, this discrepancy does not establish misconduct. He looked toward the directors. It establishes only that the travel schedule and reimbursement record do not fully align. Charles Bennett nodded. Continue. Michael displayed another trip. Phoenix. Again, the conference officially concluded on Friday afternoon. Again, the reimbursement reflected a Saturday checkout. Another extra night. Then Chicago, then Charlotte. Different cities. The same pattern. Michael never raised his voice. He never suggested motives. He simply presented documents exactly as they existed. Across 18 months, he explained, we identified 7 conferences with similar timing discrepancies. Ryan Caldwell shifted in his chair. Gianna remained focused on the screen. Michael clicked again. A timeline stretched across the monitor. Blue represented official conference schedules. Gray represented hotel stays. Most matched perfectly. 7 extended beyond the approved itinerary. Again, Michael repeated, timing differences require explanation. Nothing more. One director raised his hand. Mr. Brooks. Yes. Were these reimbursements approved? They were. Properly documented? Yes. So, where is the concern? Michael appreciated the question. The concern is consistency. He enlarged one section of the timeline. When documentation describing the same trip differs, auditors determine why. Charles looked around the room. That's standard practice. Several executives nodded. No one challenged that. Michael continued. The next review involved authorization records. Another slide appeared. Corporate approval log. Every reimbursement required an electronic signature from an authorized executive. Again, nothing unusual. Until Michael enlarged several entries. 3 approvals, 3 different conferences, 1 identical digital authorization. He spoke carefully. These approvals originated from Executive Authorization Account 7. The chief financial officer frowned. That's Ryan Caldwell's authorization profile. Ryan looked toward the screen. It is. Michael nodded. According to system records, yes, Ryan answered confidently. I approved dozens of expense reports. I'm sure you did. Michael clicked again. A second set of records appeared. Building access logs. Electronic badge activity. The room grew noticeably quieter. Michael pointed toward one entry. At 8:42 p.m. on September 15th, this reimbursement received executive approval. He highlighted another document. According to building security, Mr. Caldwell's identification badge exited headquarters at 5:16 p.m. Ryan leaned forward. I could have logged in remotely. Correct. Michael displayed another record. Your corporate laptop remained disconnected from the network that evening. Ryan frowned. I don't remember. Michael nodded politely. I wouldn't expect you to. He turned another page. The authorization could have occurred from another approved device. Again, no accusations. Only unanswered questions. Rebecca Lawson quietly observed every reaction around the table. She noticed who appeared surprised, who appeared concerned, who appeared unusually confident. Years of legal practice had taught her that people often revealed themselves before saying a single word. Michael proceeded. Rather than speculate, we requested server authentication logs. Another slide. Multi-factor authentication history, device registration, location verification. Every entry time-stamped to the second. The room had become so quiet that the clicking of Michael's presentation remote echoed softly against the conference room walls. Ryan no longer leaned back comfortably. He watched every document carefully. Gianna folded her hands together beneath the table. Billy remained completely still. His folder stayed unopened. Elizabeth Harper noticed. She leaned towards Charles. He hasn't looked once. Charles answered quietly. He said the facts should speak first. She nodded. He meant it. Michael continued. The audit remains ongoing. He intentionally reminded everyone. Today's purpose is to present verified findings. He changed slides. The next topic concerns document integrity. A scanned executive approval form appeared. Nothing seemed unusual until Michael displayed a second copy beside it. The signatures appeared almost identical. Almost. Michael enlarged both. The original signature contains natural pressure variation. He pointed carefully. The second copy contains repeated digital characteristics. A board member asked, "Meaning?" Michael answered simply. They were not produced in the same manner. Another silence settled over the room. Ryan finally spoke. "Are you suggesting someone forged an approval?" Michael looked directly at him. "I'm suggesting these two signatures deserve forensic examination." Charles immediately intervened. "The committee will avoid conclusions." Michael nodded. "Of course." He changed slides again. The next presentation explains why further examination became necessary. He looked toward Rebecca. Rebecca stood. "With the board's permission?" Charles nodded. "Granted." She opened one of the locked document cases she had carried into the meeting. Inside rested several evidence folders sealed with numbered labels. She removed only one. This material was obtained through ordinary corporate record preservation. She emphasized every word. No private surveillance. No unauthorized access. No personal investigations. She placed the folder before the directors. The committee requested an independent handwriting specialist. Gianna's heartbeat quickened. Ryan crossed his arms. Rebecca continued. "The specialist has not completed a final opinion. So today's discussion remains preliminary. Again, no conclusions, no accusations. Everything moved carefully, methodically, professionally." James Whitmore watched Billy from across the table. Billy hadn't changed expression once. 14 years earlier, James had wondered whether someone so young possessed the temperament required to oversee a family trust. Watching him now, he no longer wondered. Billy displayed neither satisfaction nor anger, only patience. Rebecca returned to her seat. Charles looked toward Michael. "You may continue." Michael connected another storage device. This final section concerns supporting evidence. The monitor briefly went black before displaying a simple directory listing. Digital archive, conference records, expense documentation, authorization logs. One folder stood out. External supporting materials. Ryan frowned. "I don't recognize those." Michael answered. "They were voluntarily provided." "By whom?" Michael looked toward Charles. Charles answered instead. "That information isn't relevant. It will become relevant only if the material is authenticated." Michael opened the folder. Several file names appeared. Airport reservation history, hotel registration confirmations, corporate scheduling correspondence, nothing extraordinary, until the final file name. Engineering approval.pdf. Ryan stared at the screen. "What does engineering have to do with travel expenses?" Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened another file, USB device inventory. Rebecca quietly slid a small black USB drive onto the conference table. No one touched it. Charles looked around the room. This device was submitted through legal counsel. It has remained in documented custody since receipt. Michael nodded. "Our digital forensic laboratory completed its authenticity verification yesterday." Ryan looked increasingly uncomfortable. Gianna turned toward him briefly. "Do you know what that is?" He shook his head. "No." Michael placed one hand beside the USB drive. "The contents will be presented shortly." He deliberately waited several seconds. However, he looked toward Charles. Before displaying them, the committee requested confirmation of one final procedural matter. Charles understood immediately. He turned toward Billy. "Mr. Watson?" Billy looked up. "Yes?" "As sole voting trustee, do you wish to participate in the discussion that follows?" Every person in the room waited for his answer. Billy considered the question carefully before speaking. "I'll answer as trustee." He folded his hands calmly on the table. "I have no questions. I have no comments. I request only that the committee continue exactly as it would if I weren't sitting here." Charles studied him for a brief moment. Then he nodded once. "So ordered." Rebecca quietly closed her notebook. Elizabeth Harper wrote a single sentence in the margin of hers. "No interference, exactly as expected." Michael reached toward the black USB drive. "For the record," he looked around the room, "the next evidence has not been altered, edited, or enhanced." He connected the device to the presentation computer. The loading icon appeared briefly on the large screen. No one in the room spoke. No one even reached for a glass of water. Within seconds, the first file began to open. The presentation screen remained black for several seconds while the file loaded. No one spoke. The only sound inside the boardroom came from the quiet hum of the projector mounted above the conference table. Michael Brooks rested one hand lightly beside the keyboard. "For the record," he said calmly, "the material you're about to see has been preserved under documented chain of custody procedures." He looked toward Rebecca Lawson. "Legal counsel supervised the transfer." Rebecca nodded. "Confirmed." Michael continued. "The forensic laboratory verified that no modifications were made after the files entered evidence." Again, he avoided dramatic language. No one had been accused. No conclusions had been reached. Only authenticated records would be reviewed. The screen illuminated. A scanned engineering approval form appeared. Across the top was Meridian Freight Solutions logo. Near the bottom sat an executive authorization signature. Michael enlarged the lower portion. This document authorized equipment purchases associated with the Atlanta distribution project. He pressed another key. A second engineering approval appeared beside the first, then a third. Each carried what appeared to be the same executive signature. Michael spoke quietly. "Our document examiner identified unusual similarities." He zoomed into all three signatures simultaneously. "Natural handwritten signatures vary." He pointed to tiny details. "Pressure changes. Stroke angles shift. Letter spacing differs." Another zoom. In these examples, multiple characteristics repeat with nearly identical geometry. A director asked, "Is that possible naturally?" Michael answered carefully. "Possible? Yes. Common? No." Charles Bennett leaned forward. "Has the examiner reached a final conclusion?" "Not yet." "So today's purpose?" "To demonstrate why additional examination became necessary." Charles nodded. "Proceed." Michael minimized the signatures. Another file opened, Airport Reservation History. Billy immediately recognized it. The document carried the airline's official booking records from the morning he and Owen had been left behind. Michael looked toward the directors. This record entered the audit because of an unrelated review. He deliberately clarified the point. It was not requested during a marital investigation. One of the independent directors frowned. "Explain." Michael nodded. "The travel records became relevant after comparing executive schedules with company reimbursement timelines." He highlighted one section. "Original reservation. 3 passengers. Billy Watson. Gianna Watson. Owen Watson." Another section appeared below it. Modification time. 2 hours before departure. Passengers removed. Billy Watson, Owen Watson. No one spoke. Michael continued. "The airline independently verified these records." Rebecca added, "The originals remain available if the board wishes to inspect them." Charles acknowledged her. "Thank you." Michael changed slides again. "Standing alone, these records establish only one fact." He looked around the room. The reservation changed. Nothing more. No speculation. No emotional interpretation. Only documented history. Billy remained motionless. He had not requested these records be presented. He had not volunteered them. The audit committee had decided they belonged within the broader timeline. Across the table, Gianna stared silently at the screen. For the first time that morning, she realized everyone in the room now knew exactly what had happened at the airport. Not because Billy had told them, because the airline's records had. Ryan slowly uncrossed his arms. He appeared less confident than he had an hour earlier. Michael closed the reservation file. The committee reviewed several additional supporting records. Another folder opened. Corporate calendar synchronization logs, executive meeting schedules, conference registration confirmations. Again, dates aligned. Again, timelines overlapped. Again, and no accusations, only facts arranged chronologically. Elizabeth Harper quietly addressed Michael. "Mr. Brooks." "Yes?" "What conclusion should the board draw today?" Michael answered without hesitation. "None." The response surprised several executives. He continued, "My responsibility isn't to draw conclusions. My responsibility is to identify inconsistencies requiring explanation." Elizabeth smiled slightly. "A proper answer." Michael nodded once. He displayed the next document. Digital authorization history. Unlike previous slides, this one contained no names. Only timestamps, devices, authentication records. One director studied the screen carefully. "So every approval leaves this trail?" Michael answered. "Yes." "Automatically?" "Yes." "It cannot be edited. Not without leaving additional evidence." Charles Bennett looked toward the board secretary. "Please note that answer." The secretary typed immediately. Michael continued, "Our forensic review remains incomplete. However," he enlarged one timestamp. This authorization originated from a registered device not previously associated with the approving executive." Ryan finally raised his hand. Charles acknowledged him. "Mr. Caldwell?" Ryan remained composed. "Is it possible someone borrowed another authorized device?" Michael answered honestly. "Yes." "Is it possible records synchronized incorrectly?" "Possible." "Likely?" "I haven't reached that conclusion." Ryan nodded. No further questions. The exchange lasted less than a minute, yet everyone in the room noticed something important. Michael answered every question the same way, carefully, precisely, without assuming anything he could not prove. Billy quietly respected that. It reflected exactly the standard he expected from every professional investigation. Rebecca stood once more. The committee requested one additional independent review. She lifted another sealed envelope. "This contains preliminary observations from a digital forensic specialist." She deliberately emphasized one word. Preliminary. She distributed copies only to the directors, not to executives. Not yet. Charles reviewed the first page silently. Elizabeth Harper did the same. Neither spoke immediately. After several moments, Charles looked toward Rebecca. "Has this report been finalized?" "No?" "Then we will not rely upon conclusions." Rebecca inclined her head. "Agreed." Instead, Charles summarized. "The preliminary review supports continued investigation. Nothing more, nothing less." Billy appreciated the restraint. Too many organizations rushed toward judgment. Blue Summit's board insisted upon complete verification. James Whitmore leaned toward Billy. Quietly enough that only Billy could hear, he said, "Your grandfather would approve." Billy answered without looking away from the presentation. He expected nothing less. James smiled faintly. Michael closed the forensic report. "I have one final item." He reached beside the laptop. The small black USB drive still rested on the conference table. This storage device contained copies of several corporate records. He held it up briefly. "Our laboratory verified the files originated from Meridian Systems." Ryan watched carefully. Gianna did the same. Michael connected the drive once again. A new directory appeared. Engineering documents, travel records, approval history, correspondence archive. He selected the final folder. Internal correspondence. The room became completely silent again. Inside the folder appeared several email records. Not printed emails. Metadata, sender, recipient, date, time, subject. No message content had been displayed, only transmission records. Michael explained why. The committee intentionally withheld message content pending additional legal review, Rebecca confirmed. Certain communications remained subject to privilege and privacy considerations. Charles nodded approvingly. Appropriate. Michael enlarged the metadata timeline. Several communications occurred during conference trips already discussed earlier. Again, nothing inherently improper. Business executives exchanged emails constantly. The timeline alone proved nothing. Then Michael stopped scrolling. One particular entry remained highlighted. Its timestamp matched the evening and executive authorization had been digitally approved from an unexpected device. Michael spoke carefully. This correspondence occurred within minutes of that authorization. No one interrupted. The committee recommends obtaining complete authentication records before reaching any conclusions. Charles looked around the room. Any objections? None. He turned toward the independent directors. The recommendation is accepted. Michael disconnected the USB drive. For today, he closed his laptop. That concludes the factual presentation. The room remained quiet. Everyone expected Charles Bennett to begin discussing possible actions. Instead, he surprised them. We will recess for 15 minutes. Several executives looked confused. Charles continued. During the recess, directors will privately review today's materials. He looked toward the executives. No discussions regarding evidence are to occur outside this room. The instruction was clear. No hallway conversations, no phone calls, no attempts to coordinate explanations. Everyone acknowledged the order. Chairs quietly moved as people stood. Billy remained seated. He hadn't touched the coffee placed before him. He hadn't opened his evidence folder. He simply watched Manhattan through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Gianna hesitated before leaving the room. For a brief moment, she looked toward Billy. He never looked back. Not out of anger, not out of contempt. He was simply waiting, just as he always had, for every fact to be presented before anyone said another word. The most difficult conversations of the day had not yet begun. 15 minutes later, the board members returned to the conference room. Conversation stopped as soon as Charles Bennett resumed his seat. The chairman waited until everyone settled before speaking. "We are back on the record," the corporate secretary confirmed the time. "Proceedings resumed at 2:18 p.m. Charles looked around the room. "Thank you for your patience." He folded his hands. "The board has reviewed the material presented this morning." He paused briefly. No conclusions regarding individual responsibility have been reached. Several executives visibly relaxed. However, Charles continued, the directors unanimously agree that additional clarification is required before this review can conclude. He turned toward Rebecca Lawson. "Counsel?" Rebecca stood. "Mr. Chairman, please explain the next phase." Rebecca walked to the center of the room without carrying a single document. The committee's responsibility now is straightforward. She looked around the table. We have records. We have timelines. We have preliminary forensic observations. What we do not yet have are explanations. She allowed the sentence to settle. Every individual whose responsibilities intersect with these records will have an opportunity to respond. No one objected. It reflected both company policy and basic fairness. Rebecca returned to her seat. Charles nodded once. The board will proceed accordingly. He opened a thin folder. The first topic concerns executive travel authorization. He looked toward Ryan Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell. Ryan straightened in his chair. Yes, Mr. Chairman? Please remain seated. Ryan nodded. Charles spoke in the same calm voice he had used throughout the day. During the review, several reimbursement approvals associated with your executive authorization profile were identified for additional verification. Do you dispute that those approvals were issued under your credentials? Ryan answered confidently. No. Do you recall approving those expense reports? I approved hundreds. So, not individually. No. Charles nodded. That's understandable. He looked toward Michael Brooks. Please display Exhibit 12. The monitor illuminated with a familiar authorization log. Michael highlighted 3 entries. Charles continued. Can you explain why these approvals originated from a device not previously associated with your executive profile? Ryan considered the question. I can't. You cannot. I don't remember which device I used on those dates. Charles made a brief note. No further questions at this time. There was no confrontation, no raised voices. Only another unanswered question added to the record. Next, Charles turned toward the Chief Information Officer. Mr. Harris. The executive adjusted his glasses. Yes. Please explain the company's authentication procedures. Mr. Harris stood. Every executive receives a unique authorization profile. Can those credentials be shared? They're not supposed to be. Technically possible. Yes. Permitted. No. What happens if someone uses another executive's credentials? He answered carefully. The system records device identifiers, timestamps, and authentication history. So the activity remains traceable. In most cases. Charles thanked him. Please be seated. The explanation required less than 3 minutes. Yet it established another important fact. The system itself remembered far more than people did. Charles turned another page. The next topic concerns engineering approvals. He looked toward the Vice President of Engineering. Mr. Alvarez. A gray-haired engineer stood. I reviewed those approvals. Charles nodded. Do the projects themselves appear legitimate? Yes. The equipment was delivered. It was. The work was completed. Correct. So today's concern does not involve project execution. No. It concerns documentation. Exactly. Again, another distinction. The board refused to confuse operational success with procedural accuracy. Both mattered. They simply represented different questions. As Mr. Alvarez returned to his seat, Charles paused. The next clarification involves executive travel. He looked toward Gianna. Ms. Watson. The title struck her unexpectedly. Not Gianna, not Vice President. Ms. Watson, professional, neutral, separated from every personal relationship. She stood slowly. Yes, Mr. Chairman. Charles maintained steady eye contact. You attended multiple conferences during the review period. I did. Were those conferences legitimate business events? Yes. Did Meridian benefit from your attendance? I believe so. No one disputes that. Gianna relaxed slightly. Charles continued. Our question concerns documentation. He nodded toward Michael. Please display Exhibit 19. The screen showed Atlanta once again. Official conference schedule. Hotel stay. Expense reimbursement. Charles asked. Can you explain why your reimbursement reflected an additional night beyond the scheduled conference? Gianna answered honestly. I stayed to meet with regional suppliers. Was that meeting documented? She hesitated. I believe so. Believe in Tan? I'll need to verify. Charles nodded without criticism. That's acceptable. He wrote another note. No further questions at this time. Gianna sat down. Her heartbeat remained elevated. The board hadn't accused her of anything, yet every answer now required documentation. Memory alone no longer carried much weight. Charles closed the folder. The board appreciates everyone's cooperation. He looked toward Michael. Have all factual presentations concluded? Yes, Rebecca added, subject to additional evidence if later discovered. Charles acknowledged her. Very well. He leaned back slightly. There remains one governance matter unrelated to the audit. Several executives looked puzzled. Charles continued. As today's ownership presentation demonstrated, he glanced toward Billy. The Watson Heritage Trust serves as Blue Summit Capital's controlling owner. Everyone already knew that. Charles continued anyway. Corporate governance requires that significant ownership interests remain accurately reflected in board records. He looked toward Billy. Mr. Watson. Billy raised his eyes. Yes. This is the first occasion on which several Meridian executives have formally met the Trust's active voting trustee. Billy nodded. It is. Charles smiled politely. For the benefit of accurate corporate records, would you briefly describe your role? The request surprised no one. It wasn't dramatic, it was administrative. Billy stood. His navy suit looked almost ordinary against the polished boardroom surroundings. He placed one hand lightly on the back of his chair. My responsibilities are limited. He spoke slowly. The Watson Heritage Trust owns long-term interests in several companies. My responsibility is protecting those ownership interests. He looked around the room. I don't manage daily operations. I don't negotiate customer contracts. I don't supervise executives. I don't approve expense reports. He paused. The board hires talented people to perform those responsibilities. Several directors nodded. Billy continued. My duty begins when governance questions arise, and ends when governance questions are resolved. Nothing more, nothing less. He sat down. No applause followed. None was appropriate. Instead, Charles spoke quietly. Thank you. Elizabeth Harper looked toward Billy. May I ask one question? Billy nodded. Of course. You've served as trustee for 14 years. Yes. How many times have you personally attended a Meridian Executive Board meeting? Billy answered immediately. This one. Several executives exchanged surprised glances. Elizabeth continued. So before today, I intentionally remained absent. Why? Billy answered without hesitation. Because ownership should not interfere with management. The simplicity of the answer filled the room. Elizabeth smiled. I appreciate that. She wrote one final note before closing her folder. Across the table, Gianna stared quietly at Billy. Pieces of their marriage suddenly rearranged themselves inside her memory. The modest house, the older pickup truck, the weekends spent coaching Owen's baseball team, the vacations planned around school calendars instead of luxury resorts. She had once assumed Billy lacked ambition. Now she realized something entirely different. He had possessed the means to live almost any lifestyle imaginable. He had simply chosen not to. Ryan looked toward Billy as well. For the first time since entering the boardroom, he seemed genuinely uncertain. Not about the audit. About the man sitting across from him, Billy had never mentioned ownership, never hinted at influence, never used authority to impress anyone. Charles gathered the meeting papers into a single stack. The board has one final matter before adjournment. He looked toward Rebecca. Counsel, has the committee received any additional evidence since this morning? Rebecca glanced briefly at her tablet. Yes. When? Approximately 12 minutes ago. The room became still once again. Charles raised an eyebrow. Has authenticity been verified? It has. Relevant. Rebecca answered carefully. Highly relevant. She placed a newly printed folder on the conference table. Michael Brooks looked at it with visible curiosity. Even he hadn't seen its contents. Charles examined the cover page. Then he slowly looked up. It appears, he paused, the investigation has just taken a very unexpected turn. Every person in the room watched as he opened the folder. Charles Bennett opened the newly delivered folder without speaking. The room waited. No one reached for a phone. No one whispered. The only sound came from the quiet turning of several pages. After nearly a minute, Charles looked toward Rebecca Lawson. Please summarize the submission. Rebecca stood. Approximately 12 minutes ago, the audit committee received additional documentation from Meridian's Information Security Department. She placed a copy before each independent director. The records were requested earlier this week. The delay resulted from encrypted archive restoration. Charles nodded. So the request predates today's meeting? Yes. Significantly, Rebecca continued. The material has been authenticated by Meridian's information security team. She paused. It supplements evidence already presented. Not replaces. Supplements. Michael Brooks reviewed the first page. His eyebrows lifted almost imperceptibly. I wasn't expecting this. Rebecca answered quietly. Neither was I. Charles looked toward Michael. Can you explain what we're seeing? Michael adjusted his glasses. The archive contains complete authentication logs. He looked around the room. Not summaries. Complete records. He connected his laptop once again. Within seconds, a new timeline appeared on the screen. Unlike the earlier versions, this one contained significantly more detail. Device identification, authentication method, network location, multi-factor verification, session duration. Every action had been preserved automatically by Meridian's security system. Michael spoke carefully. This information wasn't available during my original review. He enlarged one section. The restored logs answer several questions that previously remained unresolved. Ryan Caldwell leaned forward. Gianna watched silently. Michael highlighted an authorization record from the Atlanta conference. The executive approval originated from Executive Authorization Account 7. Everyone recognized that account by now. Ryan's. Michael clicked again. A second panel appeared beside it. Registered device. Executive Tablet 14. He enlarged another field. Current assigned user. Ryan Caldwell. Another click. Device location. Atlanta Convention Hotel. Room network. Charles interrupted. Can the system determine who physically held the device? Michael answered honestly. No. It identifies only the registered hardware. So possession remains unknown. Correct. Another important distinction. Technology-documented devices, not intentions, not physical possession. Michael continued. However, he highlighted another record. At the same timestamp, Mr. Caldwell's company's smartphone authenticated from the convention center. Ryan frowned. Michael continued. The tablet and the smartphone authenticated from different network locations, approximately 6 minutes apart. Silence settled over the room. Charles asked, possible explanation. Michael answered. The registered user could have left one device elsewhere. Another individual could have possessed it. or additional circumstances not yet identified. Again. No conclusions, only possibilities supported by evidence. Rebecca spoke next. The committee recommends interviewing every individual with documented access to executive devices during the relevant period. Charles nodded. Reasonable. He wrote another note. No objections. None. Michael advanced to the next record. Phoenix, then Chicago, then Charlotte. The same careful methodology, the same measured language, the same refusal to speculate. By the end of the presentation, one fact had become clear. Questions remained, but the questions had become much narrower. Charles closed his notebook. The investigation has progressed. He looked around the room. It has not concluded. He turned toward Rebecca. Any recommendation? Rebecca stood. The audit committee recommends placing several reimbursement approvals under temporary administrative review. She immediately clarified. This is not disciplinary action. It preserves records while verification continues. The chief financial officer nodded. Standard procedure. Charles looked toward the directors. Motion. Elizabeth Harper raised her hand. So moved. Another director immediately seconded. Second. All in favor? Every independent director voted yes. The motion carries. No executive had been suspended. No accusation had been entered into the record. Only documents had been preserved, exactly as policy required. Charles paused before continuing. There remains one final governance matter. He looked toward Billy. Mr. Watson. Billy met his eyes. As controlling trustee, do you wish to exercise any ownership authority regarding Meridian management today? Every executive understood the importance of the question. Legally, Billy possessed significant voting authority through the trust. The room waited. Billy stood slowly. No? Several people looked surprised. He continued. The investigation remains incomplete. He spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. I won't influence personnel decisions while facts remain under review. He paused. The board exists for precisely this reason, so that governance does not depend upon one individual's preferences. Charles studied him quietly. Even though you possess the authority, Billy nodded, especially because I possess it. Silence followed. Elizabeth Harper wrote another note. Uses authority by refusing unnecessary authority. Charles smiled faintly. The record will reflect your position. Billy sat down again. Across the table, Gianna stared at him. She remembered dozens of conversations over the years. Times she had complained about executives who enjoyed displaying their title. Times she had joked that people with real power always wanted others to notice. Billy had never corrected her. He had simply smiled. Now she understood why. The meeting moved toward its conclusion. Charles addressed the executives. The audit committee will continue its review. Additional interviews will occur over the coming weeks. Requested documents must remain preserved. He looked directly at every executive. Full cooperation is expected. Every executive acknowledged the instruction. Ryan spoke first. You'll have mine. Gianna followed immediately. Mine as well. Charles nodded. Thank you. Rebecca collected several evidence folders. Michael disconnected his laptop. The atmosphere inside the room had changed dramatically from the morning. Not because anyone had been publicly condemned, because everyone now understood that every future decision would rest upon verified evidence rather than assumptions. As assistants began organizing documents, Charles addressed Billy once more. Would you remain for a few minutes after adjournment? Of course. He turned back towards the room. If there is no further business? He looked around the table. No one requested recognition. This meeting is adjourned. The corporate secretary recorded the time. Adjourned at 4:11 p.m. Chairs moved quietly across the polished floor. Executives gathered briefcases. Conversations remained subdued. No one discussed the evidence. The chairman's instructions had been clear. Gianna slowly approached Billy after most people had left the room. She stopped several feet away. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. I didn't know. Billy looked at her calmly. I know. She searched his face. Why didn't you ever tell me? Billy answered without hesitation. Because I wanted someone to choose me. He paused. Not my position. Those 7 words struck harder than anything presented during the entire board meeting. Gianna lowered her eyes. Billy continued gently. I never lied to you. No. You never asked. She couldn't argue. She hadn't. Over the years, she had assumed she understood his life. She had never been curious enough to ask deeper questions. Another silence settled between them. Not hostile. Simply honest. Finally, Gianna spoke again. I'm sorry about the airport. Billy nodded once. I appreciate you saying that. She looked up hopefully. Can we talk? Billy considered the request. One day, her expression softened slightly. But not today. He shook his head. Today belongs to the investigation and to our responsibilities. He picked up his weathered leather briefcase. I need to keep those separate. For the first time since they had married, Gianna fully understood what had guided Billy's decisions for years. It had never been secrecy. It had been principle. As Billy walked toward the boardroom door, James Whitmore waited quietly in the hallway. You handled that well, James said. Billy gave a small smile. I handled it the only way I knew. James nodded. Your grandfather would have recognized that answer. Together they walked toward the elevator while the boardroom behind them slowly emptied. The investigation would continue. The evidence would continue to speak. But something equally important had already become clear. Respect could never be demanded by wealth, titles, or ownership. It had to be earned by the quiet discipline to use power only when absolutely necessary. 3 weeks passed. The public face of Meridian Freight Solutions remained almost unchanged. Distribution centers continued operating around the clock. Freight moved across highways, rail terminals, and warehouses exactly as scheduled. Customers noticed nothing unusual. Inside the company, however, the audit committee continued its work. Every requested document was produced, every executive interview was recorded, every digital record was independently verified. The investigation moved steadily rather than quickly. That was intentional. Blue Summit's directors preferred accuracy over speed. Billy returned to his normal routine almost immediately after the New York meeting. He drove Owen to school. He met logistics clients. He reviewed supply chain reports. On Saturday morning, true to his promise, he took Owen fishing at a quiet lake outside Franklin. As they sat on the dock, Owen finally asked the question he had been carrying for weeks. Dad? Billy looked up from untangling a fishing line. Yeah. Are you and Mom okay? Billy took a slow breath. Children deserved honesty. They did not deserve burdens. We're working through some difficult things. Owen nodded quietly. Did you have a fight? We disagreed about some important decisions. Owen stared at the calm water. Are you mad at her? Billy considered the question carefully. I'm disappointed. That's different. It is. How? Billy smiled gently. Being angry usually fades. Being disappointed means something important needs to be repaired. Owen thought about that for several moments. Can it be repaired? Billy looked across the lake. I don't know yet. It was the most honest answer he could give. Later that afternoon, Gianna stood alone in the family home. Billy had temporarily moved into the guest bedroom after returning from New York. Not because either of them had demanded it, because they both needed space to think. The silence inside the house felt unfamiliar. She walked through the living room. Family photographs lined the shelves. Billy coaching Owen's Little League team. Camping trips, school concerts, Christmas mornings. In every photograph, Billy wore the same quiet smile. She stopped at one picture taken 8 years earlier. Their first small house, old furniture, second-hand dining table. Neither of them had much money then. At least that was what she had believed. Now she understood that Billy had possessed something far more valuable than money. He had possessed the freedom not to prove anything. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Laura Watson stood outside. "Hi." Gianna opened the door. "Laura, I hope I'm not interrupting." "No." Laura stepped inside. "I wanted to check on Owen. He's fishing with Billy." Laura smiled. "Good." An awkward silence followed. Finally, Gianna spoke. "You knew," Laura answered honestly. "About the trust?" Gianna nodded. "Yes." "For years?" Gianna lowered her eyes. "Everyone in his family knew." Laura shook her head. "Not everyone." Gianna looked confused. "Our parents told only the people who absolutely needed to know." "Why?" Laura smiled faintly. "Because that's how Grandpa Thomas wanted it." She walked toward the bookshelf. "He always believed that wealth changes how people look at you." Gianna whispered, "I guess he was right." Laura looked at her kindly. Billy never wanted someone to love an organization. He wanted someone to love him. Those words remained in Gianna's mind long after Laura left. Monday morning brought another development. Rebecca Lawson called Billy. "The committee finished another round of interviews." Billy listened quietly. "Anything I need to know?" "Only one thing." Rebecca paused. "The evidence continues supporting procedural failures." "Not conclusions." "Correct." Billy appreciated the distinction. "What happens next?" "The independent directors meet Friday. They'll decide. They'll decide whether additional action is necessary." Billy thanked her before ending the call. He never asked for details. He trusted the process he had promised not to influence. Across town, Ryan Caldwell sat alone in his office. For the first time in years, he looked genuinely tired. Stacks of requested documents covered his desk. Every calendar entry, every expense report, every travel authorization. He rubbed his forehead before answering another email from the audit committee. He had cooperated fully, yet uncertainty remained exhausting. A quiet knock came from his assistant. "Mr. Caldwell." "Yes, Ms. Watson is here." "Send her in." Gianna entered carrying a folder. "You wanted to see me?" Ryan nodded. "I've been thinking." "So have I." He leaned back. "Did Billy ever mention owning Blue Summit?" "No. Not once. Never." Ryan stared out the office window. "I keep replaying every conversation we've ever had." "So do I." He laughed quietly. "I used to think he lacked ambition." Gianna closed her eyes briefly. "I said that too." Ryan shook his head. "We were wrong." Neither said anything for several moments. Finally, Ryan spoke again. "He never competed with anyone?" "No." "He never bragged?" "No." "He never tried to impress the room?" Gianna answered softly. "He never needed to." The realization carried unexpected weight. Power that required constant display often wasn't real power at all. Billy had understood that long before either of them. That evening, Billy arrived home carrying groceries. Gianna happened to be preparing dinner. For the first time in weeks, they found themselves alone in the kitchen. "I picked up Owen's favorite pasta," Billy said. "Thanks." Another quiet pause. Gianna finally turned toward him. "I've been thinking about what you said." Billy looked up. "Which part?" I wanted someone to choose me. He nodded. I meant it. I know. She rested both hands on the kitchen counter. I spent years measuring success by promotions. You earned those promotions, but somewhere along the way, she searched for the right words. I started measuring people the same way. Billy didn't interrupt. I kept asking who had more influence. Who had the better title? Who sat at the bigger table? She looked directly at him. I forgot to ask who kept their promises. Billy remained quiet. She continued, You always kept yours. The words hung gently between them, not as an apology, as an acknowledgement. Billy answered honestly. I wasn't perfect. I know. I made mistakes too. She shook her head. But not the ones I kept accusing you of. Before Billy could respond, the front door opened. Owen ran inside carrying his baseball glove. Dad, Billy smiled immediately. How was practice? I finally hit one over the fence. Billy laughed. That's amazing. Owen looked between his parents. You guys cooking together? Billy and Gianna exchanged a brief glance. For tonight, Billy answered. Yeah, Owen grinned. Good. He raced upstairs to change clothes. The kitchen became quiet again. Gianna smiled faintly. He notices everything. Billy nodded. He always has. Later that night, after Owen had gone to bed, Billy sat alone on the back porch. The summer air felt unusually cool. His phone vibrated. James Whitmore. Billy answered. Evening, James. The independent directors finished reviewing the committee's recommendations. Billy waited. They've reached a decision. Billy looked out across the dark backyard. Will they announce it Friday? Yes. James paused. And Billy? Yes. No matter what happens. Billy listened. The board wanted me to tell you something. What? James smiled quietly on the other end of the line. They believe the trust chose the right trustee 14 years ago. Billy remained silent for several moments. Not because he didn't know what to say, because some acknowledgments carried more weight than words. Finally, he answered. Tell them thank you. I will. After the call ended, Billy looked up at the stars. The board's decision would affect the company. The investigation had affected his marriage. Neither outcome could change one simple truth. Character had never been built in the boardroom. It had been built quietly over thousands of ordinary days, long before anyone knew who he really was. 6 months later, autumn had settled across Tennessee. The maple trees lining Billy's neighborhood glowed with shades of gold and deep red. The morning air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves as children waited for school buses with backpacks slung over their shoulders. Life had found a new rhythm. Not the same rhythm as before, a healthier one. At Meridian Freight Solutions, the audit committee had completed its investigation 3 months earlier. Its final report exceeded 300 pages. The conclusions reflected exactly what the board had promised from the beginning. Evidence, documentation, verified facts. The investigation identified procedural failures involving executive authorization controls, expense approval practices, and internal compliance oversight. Several reimbursement requests had violated company policy. Certain approval procedures had not been properly followed. Most importantly, weaknesses in executive credential management had allowed corporate controls to become less reliable than required. The board responded accordingly. Mandatory cybersecurity reforms, stronger authentication procedures, independent expense verification, quarterly governance reviews, additional compliance training for every executive. No sensational press conference followed. No public humiliation occurred. The board believed that organizations became stronger by correcting systems rather than seeking headlines. Personnel decisions were handled privately. Ryan Caldwell resigned from Meridian several weeks after the report became final. His resignation statement thanked employees and accepted responsibility for leadership failures under his supervision. The company wished him well. Nothing more. Gianna remained with Meridian. Not because of favoritism, not because of Billy. The investigation concluded that while documentation under her responsibility required correction, the operational improvements she had led remained genuine and significant. The board unanimously required executive coaching additional compliance oversight and temporary limitations on financial authorization authority. Gianna accepted every recommendation without objection. She never appealed. She never blamed anyone else. Instead, she chose to rebuild trust one decision at a time. Her colleagues noticed the difference almost immediately. She arrived earlier, asked more questions, verified every approval personally, encouraged junior managers to challenge unclear procedures rather than quietly accepting them. Within months, employees described her leadership differently. Not tougher, better. One Thursday afternoon, Elizabeth Harper visited Meridian for a governance review. After the meeting concluded, she remained behind with Gianna. "I've watched your progress carefully," Elizabeth said. Gianna smiled politely. "I appreciate that." Elizabeth closed her notebook. "Do you know why the board retained you?" Gianna answered honestly. "I've wondered." Elizabeth nodded. "You made mistakes." "I did. But when presented with evidence..." She paused. "Wait, You accepted responsibility instead of protecting your pride." Gianna looked down for a moment. "I almost didn't. But you did." Elizabeth smiled warmly. "Companies can teach procedures. They cannot easily teach humility." Those words stayed with Gianna long after Elizabeth departed. Across town, Billy's consulting business continued growing quietly. His clients appreciated his practical advice. Most still had no idea that he served as trustee of one of the country's largest transportation investment groups. Billy preferred it that way. On Wednesday mornings, he volunteered at Owen's School Robotics Club. On Friday evenings, he coached baseball. On weekends, he still mowed his own lawn. Neighbors continued waving as they always had. Nothing about his daily life suggested extraordinary wealth. Because nothing about his values had changed. One Saturday morning, Billy parked his old pickup outside a neighborhood hardware store. As he loaded bags of mulch into the truck bed, another customer recognized him from a business magazine that had recently published an article about Blue Summit's governance reforms. "Excuse me," Billy turned. "Weren't you in that magazine?" Billy smiled politely. "I was interviewed." "I had no idea." The man looked genuinely surprised. "You own all those companies?" Billy shook his head. "No. I protect them." The customer looked confused. Billy continued. "Thousands of people build those companies every day. I'm simply responsible for protecting their long-term future." The man nodded slowly. "I guess that's different." "It is." They shook hands before each returned to loading gardening supplies into their trucks. No photographs, no requests for autographs. Just two neighbors discussing landscaping. Billy liked it that way. That evening, Gianna arrived at the Watson house carrying a homemade apple pie. Owen opened the front door. "Mom." He hugged her tightly. "I helped make dessert," she said. "You baked," Billy called from their kitchen. "Come on in." Dinner had become a regular tradition again. Every Saturday evening. No lawyers, no board members, no discussions about investigations, just family. The road back had not been easy. Billy and Gianna had spent months attending marriage counseling. Some conversations had been painful. Others had lasted only a few minutes before either needed time to think. Trust, they learned, returned much more slowly than apologies. After dinner, Owen carried the empty plates into the kitchen. "I'll help wash." Billy smiled. "I'll dry." Gianna laughed softly. "I guess that leaves me." "You made dessert," Owen answered. "You're excused." She watched father and son laughing over soap bubbles and dripping plates. For years, she had believed success meant constantly moving toward something bigger. A larger office, a higher title, another promotion. Now she understood that some of life's greatest achievements happened inside ordinary kitchens on quiet Saturday nights. Later, after Owen went upstairs to finish homework, Billy and Gianna sat together on the back porch. The same porch where Billy had once wondered whether their marriage could survive. Autumn leaves drifted gently across the yard. Gianna broke the comfortable silence. "I've wanted to ask you something." Billy looked toward her. "Go ahead." "When your grandfather created the trust," she hesitated, "did he expect all this?" Billy smiled thoughtfully. "No." "What did he expect?" "He expected people." She looked puzzled. Billy leaned back. He believed businesses always face difficult moments. He believed leaders would sometimes disappoint each other. He believed money could solve many problems. He paused. But never character. Gianna nodded slowly. "I think I finally understand." Billy looked at her. "What changed?" She smiled. "I used to think power came from controlling people. And now, I think real power comes from controlling yourself." Billy laughed quietly. Grandpa would have liked that. She reached over and gently took his hand. Not dramatically, not as a grand gesture, simply because it felt natural again. For a long moment, neither spoke. They watched Owen through the living room window as he proudly showed Laura Watson his latest science project. Family, ordinary, peaceful. Billy finally broke the silence. "You know..." "What?" "I never wanted you to admire the trust." "I know. I wanted you to believe in the man who happened to serve it." Gianna squeezed his hand gently. "I do now." Across the street, porch lights gradually illuminated one house after another. Children laughed while riding bicycles before sunset. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Life continued. Not because difficult things had never happened, because people had chosen to learn from them. Inside Blue Summit Capital's headquarters in New York, Charles Bennett signed the final governance report before placing it into the company's permanent archives. He looked toward James Whitmore. "This case will probably be studied for years." James smiled. "For the investigation?" Charles shook his head. "No." He closed the archive box. "For the reminder." "What reminder?" Charles answered without hesitation. "That the strongest leaders are usually the ones least interested in proving they're powerful." James nodded quietly. "I've known one like that for a long time." The archive box was sealed. The investigation officially became history. Its lessons would remain much longer. 1 year later, spring returned to Tennessee with clear skies, green fields, and the familiar sounds of youth baseball filling neighborhood parks every weekend. On a Saturday afternoon, parents unfolded lawn chairs along the first base line, while children chased ground balls across freshly cut grass. Billy Watson stood near the dugout wearing a faded team cap and a weathered baseball glove tucked beneath one arm. To everyone at the park, he looked exactly as he always had. Coach Billy. Nothing more, nothing less. "Coach." Owen jogged over, smiling. "You think I'll finally hit one over the left field fence today?" Billy grinned. "I think you'll make the right decision at the plate." Owen laughed. "That's not what I asked." Billy shrugged. "The right decisions usually lead to the best results." Owen shook his head dramatically. "You always answer like that." Billy smiled. "I know." The umpire called both teams onto the field. Parents applauded. Children laughed. For Billy, there were few boardrooms in the world more important than this baseball diamond. Across the parking lot, a black sedan quietly pulled into an empty space. Charles Bennett stepped out. He happened to be visiting Nashville for a transportation conference and had accepted Billy's invitation to watch one inning before catching his flight home. No security detail, no formal introductions, just an older businessman carrying a folding chair. He walked toward Billy. "You picked a beautiful afternoon?" Billy smiled. "I've always thought baseball chooses the weather." Charles laughed. "Perhaps." They sat together behind the dugout. No one around them recognized the chairman of Blue Summit Capital. No one recognized the trustee sitting beside him. Both men preferred it that way. Charles watched Owen make a clean catch in center field. "He has good instincts. He works hard." "I can tell." Several minutes passed before Charles spoke again. "The governance reforms are working." Billy nodded. "I read the quarterly report. Compliance scores are the highest in company history." "That's good." Charles looked toward him. "You don't sound surprised." Billy smiled faintly. "People usually rise when they're trusted with clear expectations." Charles nodded thoughtfully. "You've always believed that." "I've seen it too many times not to." The inning ended. Children ran laughing toward the dugout. Parents applauded another ordinary Saturday game. Charles stood. "I should head to the airport." Billy extended his hand. "Safe travels." Charles shook it warmly. "You know." Billy waited. "When historians eventually write about Meridian," Charles smiled, "they'll probably focus on the investigation." Billy chuckled softly. "They'll miss the important part." "And what was that?" "That the company became healthier afterward." Charles nodded. "As your grandfather always hoped." With that, he quietly walked back toward his car. No one stopped him. No one knew who had just left the ballpark. That anonymity felt strangely appropriate. Several weeks later, Blue Summit Capital hosted its annual leadership conference in New York. Unlike previous years, one session drew particular attention. Its title was simple: Leadership Without Ego. Elizabeth Harper stood before hundreds of executives from every Blue Summit company. Behind her appeared no names, no photographs, only one sentence projected across the screen. "Real authority is measured by restraint." Elizabeth addressed the audience. "A year ago, one of our portfolio companies experienced significant governance challenges." She deliberately avoided identifying individuals. The investigation succeeded because everyone involved respected the same principles. She counted them one by one. Facts before assumptions. Procedures before personalities. Accountability before reputation. She paused. And integrity before authority. The audience remained silent. Many executives recognized the story without needing names. Elizabeth smiled. "Leadership isn't tested when everything goes well. It's tested when you possess the power to force an outcome." She paused briefly. "And choose fairness instead." The room responded with quiet applause. Not enthusiastic, respectful. Exactly the response she hoped for. Back in Franklin, Gianna had also changed. Her office looked different now. Fewer awards decorated the walls. Instead, framed photographs of employees filled the shelves. Warehouse teams, drivers, maintenance crews, regional managers. People. Every Monday morning, she began leadership meetings with the same question. What problem aren't we seeing yet? The question encouraged honesty. Managers gradually stopped hiding mistakes. Instead, they solved them together. One afternoon, a newly promoted supervisor nervously entered her office. "I made an approval error." Gianna smiled gently. "Thank you for telling me." The young supervisor blinked. "You're not angry?" "No." Gianna stood and walked beside him toward the conference table. "Let's understand it. Then let's fix it." Within 30 minutes, the problem had been corrected. Before leaving, the supervisor hesitated. "Can I ask something?" "Of course." "Why are you so calm?" Gianna smiled. "Because someone once showed me that protecting the truth is more important than protecting your pride." The supervisor quietly nodded. He never forgot that conversation. On a warm Friday evening, Billy and Gianna walked together along the neighborhood sidewalk while Owen rode his bicycle several yards ahead. They had rebuilt their marriage slowly. Not perfectly. Trust rarely returned in dramatic moments. It returned through consistency, shared breakfasts, honest conversations, kept promises, showing up, again and again. Gianna looked toward Billy. "I used to think I knew what success looked like." Billy smiled. "What does it look like now?" She watched Owen laughing as he circled back toward them. "It looks like coming home?" Billy reached for her hand. "So does happiness." They continued walking without another word. Sometimes silence expressed peace better than conversation ever could. Several months later, James Whitmore officially retired after nearly 5 decades of legal service to the Watson Heritage Trust. A small private dinner celebrated his career. No reporters attended, no cameras, only family trustees and a handful of lifelong friends. At the end of the evening, James stood to make one final toast. When Thomas Watson created this trust, he looked towards Billy. He hoped future generations would remember one lesson. James raised his glass. "Wealth can build buildings. It can purchase companies. It can create opportunities." He smiled warmly. "But only character earns trust." He looked directly at Billy. "I've spent 50 years watching trustees." His voice softened. "And I've never known one who understood that lesson better." The room quietly raised their glasses. Billy stood only long enough to answer. "The credit belongs to everyone who taught me." He looked toward Laura, toward James, toward the empty chair that symbolically honored his grandfather. "I've simply tried to live up to the example they left behind." That was all he said. It was enough. Months later, a young business student interviewing Billy for a university leadership project asked one final question. "If people remember you one day..." The student hesitated. "What would you want them to remember?" Billy thought for a moment before answering. "Not what I owned. Not the companies. Not the title." He smiled. "I hope they remember that I treated people fairly." The student closed the notebook. "I think that's a rare answer." Billy laughed quietly. "I hope one day it isn't." As the interview ended, Billy walked outside into the afternoon sunshine. Employees greeted him with friendly waves. Neighbors recognized him as Owen's father. Parents knew him as Coach Billy. Clients respected him as a dependable consultant. The title of trustee mattered only in the few rooms where it was necessary. Everywhere else he remained exactly who he had always wanted to be. Just a man trying to keep his promises. Because in the end, companies could be bought. Titles could change, fortunes could grow or disappear. But character quietly built through ordinary choices, honest work and unwavering integrity was the only legacy that truly belonged to a person forever. Every great story reminds us that life is not defined by the titles we hold, the wealth we accumulate, or the success others can see. It is defined by the quiet choices we make when no one is watching. Billy never needed to prove his worth because his character had already done that for him. He chose patience over revenge, truth over pride, and responsibility over power. In contrast, Gianna's journey reminds us that mistakes do not have to become the end of our story. The moment we stop defending our ego and start accepting responsibility, we begin creating a better version of ourselves. Trust is not rebuilt with one apology. It is rebuilt through countless small actions, honest conversations, and promises consistently kept over time. Real leadership is not about commanding others. It is about mastering yourself. Real success is not measured by the size of your office or the balance in your bank account, but by the number of people whose lives are better. Because you chose integrity instead of convenience. At the end of the day, companies can be sold, careers can change, and fortunes can rise or fall, but your character remains the one legacy that no one can take away. So wherever life finds you today, choose honesty, choose humility, and choose to become the kind of person others can trust even when no one is keeping score. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of someone in your own life, share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what lesson meant the most to you. And if you enjoy meaningful stories about integrity, family, and life's greatest values, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channels, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you